In George Orwell's 1984, power rests in the hands of those with the skills to manipulate the rest of the population into submission. The proles make up over 80% of the population, giving them the power to rise up against the party if they wish. However, the masses never revolt of their own accord, and they never revolt merely because they are oppressed. Indeed, so long as they are not permitted to have standards of comparison, they never even become aware they are being oppressed. Orwell 212 through 213. Therefore, they are kept occupied by simple everyday matters such as the lottery, entertainment materials produced by the party, and hatred against Eurasia and East Asia. Because the consciousness of the masses needs only to be influenced in a negative way, 213, they do not receive education that can open their minds to critical thought and thought crime against the party. Thus they are allowed to have some small measures of freedom, but simply because they are regarded as animals, simple-minded, uneducated, and controllable. The members of the outer party, who have some level of education, often consciously or unconsciously criticize the party in their own minds, a natural result of having a standard of comparison and some insight to the workings of larger power structures. Parsons, the epitome of a perfect party member, was heard muttering, "Down with Big Brother," in his sleep, although he, quote, never knew he had any bad stuff in his mind at all, 240. It is clear to see that any level of education activates the part of one's brain that criticizes and condemns, and therefore the masses cannot be allowed any part of it. In the United States, the lower classes akin to the proles cannot access the same level of education as their more affluent peers due to structural problems. Here are some statistics from the APA. Children's initial reading competency is correlated with the home literacy environment, number of books owned, and parent distress. However, poor households have less access to learning materials and experiences, including books, computers, stimulating toys, skill-building lessons, or tutors to create a positive literacy environment. Unquote. Disparities in the educational success of children begins even before school start, where children in lower socioeconomic households do not have the same exposure and familiarity with books and other such materials than their peers at a young age. Quote, schools with students from the highest concentrations of poverty have fewer library resources to draw on, including fewer staffs, libraries are open fewer hours per week, and staff are less well-rounded than those serving middle-income children, unquote. The library should serve as an equalizing resource despite quality of education. However, libraries in areas with high levels of poverty are drastically less funded and staffed. Quote, according to a U.S. Census Bureau in 2014, individuals within the top family income quartile are 8 times more likely to obtain a bachelor degree by the age of 24 as compared to the individuals from the lowest family income quartile, unquote. Children in lower socioeconomic households are about twice as likely as those from high socioeconomic households to display learning-related behavior problems. A mother's socioeconomic status is also related to her child's inattention, disinterest, and lack of cooperation in school, unquote. Socioeconomic status impacts how well a child is able to learn, and their attention in school is affected by the socioeconomic status of their parents. Quote, those from higher social class backgrounds tend to be more successful in developing career aspirations and are generally better prepared for the world of work because of access to resources such as career offices, guidance counselors, better schools, high school level social actors, and familial experience with higher education, unquote. Students from lower socioeconomic households experience more hardship in the world of higher education because they are often not conditioned to have high career aspirations and do not have resources at their disposal for education beyond high school. Additionally, race plays a large factor in determining who has access to better education. Poverty disproportionately impacts communities of colors, and the law has not been on the side of providing them equal opportunities. Schools were largely desegregated after Brown v. Board of Education. However, a Supreme Court ruling in 1974 effectually reversed those efforts. The ruling allowed de facto segregation to be permitted. Essentially, as long as it was not explicitly stated that they were segregating on the basis of race, schools were required to make no effort to give students equal educational opportunities. This created the conditions for achievement gaps, disparities in quality of education and teaching, and the foreclosure of future opportunities for communities of color. Here are a few more statistics on the realities of segregation today from the Brookings Institute. Quote, 2/3 of minority students still attend schools that are predominantly minority, most of them located in central cities and funded well below those in neighboring suburban districts. Recent analysis of data prepared for school finance cases in Alabama, New Jersey, New York, Louisiana, and Texas have found that on every tangible measure, from qualified teachers to curriculum offerings, schools serving greater number of students of color had significantly fewer resources than schools serving mostly white students. In predominantly minority schools, which most students of color attend, schools are large, on average more than twice as large as predominantly white schools and reaching 3,000 students or more in most cities. On average, class sizes are 15% larger overall, 80% larger for non-special education classes. Curriculum offerings and material are lower in quality, and teachers are much less qualified in terms of level of education, certification, and training in the fields they teach. And in integrated schools, as UCLA professor Jeannie Oakes described in the 1980s, and Harvard professor Gary Orfield's research has recently confirmed, most minority students are segregated in lower-tracked classrooms with larger class sizes, less qualified teachers, and lower quality curriculum. Jonathan Kozol's 1991 Savage Inequalities described the striking differences between public schools serving students of color in urban settings and their suburban counterparts, which typically spend twice as much per student for populations with many fewer special needs. Minority students are put at the greatest risk by the American tradition of allowing enormous variation in the qualifications of teachers. The National Commission on Teaching and America's Future found that new students hired without meeting certification standards, 25% of all new teachers, are usually assigned to teach the most disadvantaged students in low-income and high-minority schools, while the most highly educated new teachers are hired larger by wealthier schools. Unquote. While the poverty and subsequently race greatly impact the quality of education and educational opportunities provided, how does this translate into the larger world and the bodies that govern it? The U.S. Census Bureau estimates that 31% of adults over the age of 25 have earned at least a 4-year degree. 95% of the household a bachelor degree or higher. Meanwhile, 66% have some type of graduate degree. Both of these figures are an increase from recent years, the Chronicle. One can argue that the nation's leaders should be highly educated. While this is likely true, the problem arises when the rest of the population cannot access that same education as a result of structural factors working against those in poverty and communities of color, implemented by the very politicians elected democratically to help the people. And yet those politicians continue to get votes. It is a problem created democratically and can only be solved in the same way. There are two levels of democracy, the people and the institutions. The people can help alleviate these problems by becoming educated on disparities in education and pressuring those in power to find solutions. You can also donate resources and money to disadvantaged schools and libraries. There are also institutional solutions. A bill passed by Congress is ultimately the best way to combat the problem. To be effective, it should greatly reduce class sizes and standardize the teacher qualifications across all schools. Tennessee's STAR project, commissioned by a state legislator in the mid-1980s, may be the most influential class reduction program in recent years. Project STAR found substantial evidence that reducing class sizes improved student academic achievement. As STAR demonstrates, there is hope. If we act democratically to fix these structural issues, we can create a new, equal America.